Things have taken a very bizarre turn. Trump's been busy, yes, but his trip to the Asia summit hasn't gone exactly as planned. The big story here isn't diplomacy. It's the global shakedown for money. We've all seen Trump's charm offensive toward Japan, and how the new prime minister played her cards perfectly, feeding his ego while protecting Tokyo's interests. Trump wanted $550 billion directly from Japan. That's a staggering demand, but Tokyo pulled off a last-minute judo flip. Behind the smiles, golf clubs, and photo ops was a deal that completely outmaneuvered Trump. Only about 1 to 2% of that figure will be direct cash investments, maybe $10 billion at most. The rest? Structured as loans and loan guarantees. In other words, Japan is once again becoming a creditor to the United States, lending money and earning interest from it. Even the loan guarantees are brilliant. Japanese companies will provide hundreds of billions in loans, and Tokyo only steps in if those loans default. It's financial theater at its best. A kabuki performance where Japan smiles, bows, and walks away with profit. Trump, of course, will call it an incredible victory. But behind closed doors, Tokyo's the one that walked away with the win. And just when you think it couldn't get more surreal, it does. Remember how Trump banned AI chip sales to China? And how Beijing retaliated by cutting off Nvidia? Well, that strategy just backfired. Trump is now in panic mode. Because here's the irony. To keep America's AI bubble from bursting, Washington may now need China's help. Nvidia, now the world's most valuable company, worth over $5 trillion, owes its rise to Trump's tech policies. But without Chinese demand, that valuation doesn't hold. So Trump is now reportedly looking to convince Beijing to buy Nvidia's newest Blackwell chip. Whether China gets the full version or a watered-down one is still unclear. But the goal is simple: reopen China's market to US semiconductors. Not just to earn billions in sales, but to slow down China's domestic R&D. Why build your own chip if you can just buy one from the Americans? On the surface, it looks like trade. In reality, it's a strategic trap. Now both sides have made small progress. Rare earths, farming imports, maybe some limited concessions. But the chip issue remains the main battlefield. Nvidia needs Chinese money to justify its sky-high valuation. But will Beijing take the bait? Probably not. China blocked Nvidia for a reason: to force its own tech sector to innovate. And it's already paying off. Huawei's Ascend 910C chip delivers 800 teraflops, faster than Nvidia's average GPUs, though still about 3 times behind the Blackwell B200. The real challenge isn't performance, it's production. China needs more advanced lithography machines. That's why Beijing has burned the boats, pushing its companies to evolve fast. No turning back, no reliance on US tech. Chinese firms have already found creative workarounds. They're clustering multiple Ascend chips to multiply computing power. Alibaba, for instance, cut back on Nvidia chips but boosted performance 9-fold through a new pooling system, making 213 chips hit like 1/200. That's why Washington is nervous. Because if China keeps innovating under pressure, those sanctions turn from weapons into fuel. Right now, Chinese chips are optimized for inference, real-world applications like manufacturing and robotics, not massive AI training models. But that's a matter of time. The next leap is from efficiency to complexity, and that's where the US is trying to keep China boxed in. Ironically, the very design of Chinese AI reflects this strategy. Their models use 8-bit number storage. Simpler, more efficient, and cheaper. That's how DeepSeek became 10 times cheaper than ChatGPT when it launched. But to build larger, more sophisticated models, they'll need better chips. So here's the central question. Will Beijing trade short-term relief for long-term self-sufficiency? Because the moment China starts importing US chips again, it risks freezing its own progress. Beijing knows it. Its advisors know it. And they expect Trump to start offering concessions. Maybe easing chip export bans in exchange for access to China's rare earths and magnets. And that's the real card on the table. China controls the minerals that power America's defense, tech, and green energy sectors. If Trump wants to keep those flowing, he'll have to give something up. Maybe not just chips, but even lithography machines from ASML and Tokyo Electron. That's where the next battle will be fought, between America's need to sell and China's determination to stand on its own. China isn't the type to give in easily, especially not on something this big. So when Trump claims a major diplomatic win, many analysts are skeptical. Beijing doesn't make one-sided concessions. If it ever does agree, it's because it's getting something just as valuable in return. That's how strategy works. And it's also why any deal tied to China buying Nvidia's new Blackwell chips would have to be a two-way exchange. But let's shift the focus for a moment, because the story gets even more curious with Trump's latest deal involving South Korea. And this one, honestly, is as strange as it is symbolic. Across Asia, leaders have learned how to handle Trump. Not through confrontation, but through flattery. In today's world, appealing to ego has become a new kind of diplomacy, and South Korea seems to have mastered that playbook. In a scene straight out of a political drama, Trump was awarded a golden crown. Yes, an actual gold crown, along with the Grand Order of Mugunghwa, the country's highest civilian honor. It's the first time this award has ever been given to a U.S. president. And the moment the White House reposted those photos, one thing became clear. Trump loved every second of it. But here's the twist. That ceremony wasn't just about prestige. It was strategy. By playing to Trump's vanity, South Korea managed to strengthen its own bargaining position. Instead of handing over massive sums or agreeing to risky financial deals, Seoul gave him something priceless: admiration. See, Korea didn't want to pour 80% of its reserves into Trump's economic demands. That would have been a financial time bomb if things went wrong later. So instead they offered symbolism. And it worked. That gesture flipped Trump's $350 billion demand completely on its head. In exchange, Seoul secured significant tariff relief. What they gave up was far smaller than what they gained. Here's how the deal breaks down. South Korea pledged about $150 billion toward U.S. shipping infrastructure, a move meant to help America rebuild its maritime industry. Another $200 billion was structured as investment commitments, not cash transfers, but a mix of equity stakes, loans, and guarantees, very similar to Japan's arrangement. And there's a catch. Seoul only has to pay $20 billion per year, meaning the deal could stretch over an entire decade. That gives them flexibility and time, because who knows what happens after Trump's term ends. Plus, if those investments don't pay off, the profit-sharing terms can be renegotiated later. In return, South Korea got something real. Tariff rates on its exports to the U.S. dropped from 25% down to 15%. It's smart diplomacy. Lower risk, lower payments, and less damage to its reserves. They gave Trump a crown, not control. But while Seoul walks away smiling, Trump doesn't look quite as strong. Around the world, countries are realizing that America's trade war can be managed, or even turned to their advantage, as long as they play to Trump's ego. The problem is, that same unpredictability is now pushing America's allies further away, especially Canada. Besant's recent remarks and Trump's off-the-cuff tariff threats may have sealed the beginning of a major shift, one that Washington didn't see coming. Here's the issue. Trump's erratic tariff-by-tweet strategy, adding or removing 10% duties overnight, is doing more harm than good. It shakes confidence and forces even close allies like Canada to start thinking long-term about how to protect themselves. Remember, 76% of Canada's exports go straight to the United States, so when Trump floated another 10% tariff, it sent shockwaves through Canada's resource-based economy. Canada exports aluminum, lumber, oil, and gas, all of which depend on cross-border infrastructure. For 2 decades, the entire network, pipelines, ports, and rail, was optimized to send goods south. Now, that very dependence is becoming a weakness, and that's why Mark Carney, Canada's economic chief, is pivoting, turning Canada toward Asia before it's too late. It's not surprising, then, that Ottawa is quietly making concessions to Asian markets, even to China. And one of the biggest shocks? Canada is reportedly considering removing tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, the same 100% import duties imposed just last year under Trudeau, alongside a 25% tariff on Chinese steel and aluminum. If that reversal happens, it would be a direct snub to Washington. Because remember, Canada hosts plants for Ford, GM, and Tesla. Letting a wave of cheaper Chinese EVs enter the market could completely upend the North American auto industry. But from a strategic point of view, it makes sense. By easing restrictions, Canada could attract Chinese automakers like BYD to build local factories, creating jobs and boosting exports. Over time, that could mean technology transfers and shared innovation between the two countries, something that would have been unthinkable a few years ago. The Asia-Canada corridor could become one of the most important new trade routes in the world. China, India, Japan, and Southeast Asia will all need massive amounts of energy to fuel their AI and manufacturing booms. And Canada, rich in natural resources, is ready to supply that demand, especially if it means selling outside the U.S. The numbers are staggering. Since 2018, Chinese exports to Canada have steadily climbed, but Canadian exports to China have barely moved, largely because of limited infrastructure. Canada simply doesn't have enough capacity to ship large oil cargoes to Asia. On top of that, Beijing still has tariffs on Canadian canola oil and maintains a ban on beef imports. But if Carney plays this pivot right, that could all change. A single diplomatic opening could unlock billions in new trade for Canada. Meanwhile, for Washington, it's a nightmare scenario. The 10% tariff threat that was supposed to keep allies in line is now backfiring in real time. Instead of isolating China, it's pushing traditional U.S. partners closer to it. And all of this, unbelievably, stems from the same problem: Trump's unpredictability. If he could resist announcing policy through late-night tweets, global markets might finally catch their breath. but instead we're left with confusion, volatility, and allies quietly hedging their bets. So here we are, a world where gold crowns replace trust, tariffs replace strategy, and America's allies are quietly preparing for life beyond US dominance. But what do you think? Will China actually agree to buy Nvidia's Blackwell chips? And did South Korea just outsmart Trump with a crown and a handshake? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And as always, stay sharp, stay safe, and don't forget to like and subscribe as we keep decoding these wild geopolitical shifts.